the things that I've rebelled against all my life is this idea of being prescriptive. If anyone tells me there is only one way to do something, I will just be blown away. There's no sort of example as well of people like me, who look like me, sound like me, have my background. You don't feel like you have the access to the film and TV industry specifically. But there's already a glass ceiling. It's more keenly felt when you're a minority. Do people think that I'm just here because of my skin colour, and then as a result you end up working twice as hard and burning yourself out even more because you feel like you've got a point to prove? I was diagnosed with depression, and that was all linked to me trying to come out to my family. I did go off the rails, and I'm very open about my struggle. You know, I became a drug addict, I was in an abusive relationship. I'm so sick of this cycle. And what happened to me could happen to anyone else, and I got so lucky that I survived. But rather than being like, oh, you know, looking down on it, I think we should embrace it.
You know, change comes from struggle and resilience, and this is a really good example of that.
My desire to do the right thing began to outweigh my fear of being punished for it, because people are scared of being punished for speaking out.
So today we have an amazing guest. I've known him recently, but every time I've spoken to him, it's been incredible. I'm very excited to welcome Adeel. Adeel is a series producer and has worked on shows like Catchphrase or 8 out of 10 Cats and many amazing shows like that. He's also a committee member on BAFTA. So I'm pretty excited to welcome Adeel Amini.
Hello.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for doing this.
That's all right.
So tell us about your origin story, your background, where did you grow up, and how did you get into the TV industry?
I love the phrase origin story, because you think, is he going to end up superhero, supervillain? Probably the latter, depending on who you ask in the industry.
We need a bit of both, right?
We do need a bit of both. Exactly. You know, what's that phrase? You got to you sort of live long enough to see yourself as a villain or something. So I haven't got quite there yet, but you know, we'll see. So my origin story is that I was born and raised in Bradford in quite a conservative Muslim household, and didn't really have any sort of idea of what I wanted to do, as most young people you know, generally tend to feel. On top of all of that, one of the difficulties that I had growing up before I even got into this industry was being a gay man from such a background. So of course that comes with its own layer of trauma and other things. God, I've really gone straight into the heavy stuff on the first question.
It's your story.
It's all relevant. So obviously I grew up with that kind of thing, and I just knew that I wanted to be some sort of storyteller. My natural instinct was to gravitate towards, you know, writing, creative writing, filmmaking in the bedroom, like that kind of thing. But it wasn't really considered a viable career for a number of reasons. One, because it's not a proper vocation. It's not being a lawyer or a doctor or all the things that your parents want you to do. The other reason is because growing up in Bradford, you don't feel like you have the access to this industry, the film and TV industry specifically. There's nothing that sort of says, oh, this, you can do this thing and we can help you do it. There's no sort of example as well of people like me, who look like me, sound like me, have my background, either on screen or off screen. There's just not enough examples of those kinds of people. So it didn't really feel like a viable thing. And then obviously I went over to uni, went to the University of Edinburgh, had a great time there, started discovering myself a little bit more, being away from home, studied English there, and then in 2008, when I graduated, I got onto a scheme at ITV and started my very wild TV career 14 years ago.
You said you went to uni.
Yeah.
And, you know, I speak to a lot of young people, and a lot of them are actually considering not to go to uni. But if you had to go into the TV film industry today, do you need a degree? Does it help? And did it help you?
The very short answer is no. I didn't know what I wanted to do, and for me, when I look back at those 4 years that I did in Edinburgh, I wouldn't change them for anything, because I was someone who'd never really left home. I just didn't really know what I wanted to do. I needed the time, I think, to find myself. And that's what uni gave me. Also gave me great friendships, great experiences, little jobs here and there. I used to edit the student newspaper, did some really big interviews as part of that. And again, it made me realise that I wanted to, find out about people's stories and do all of that kind of thing. So it wasn't, but when I joined the industry, no one really cares about your degree.
Right.
If you've got the experience and you know how to make a show, it doesn't, we welcome a degree, or, it's nice to see if you've got obviously more arts and media types end up coming into the industry. But if you've got a science degree, that could be like a gap of knowledge that, we could fill. So yeah, with the degree, it's not essential. I think there's this sort of personal Adeel and professional Adeel. Professional Adeel would be like, you don't really need it. You don't. If you've got, that thing, that X factor, the way to, communicate with people, then it's fine. Personal Adeel, I'm one of those people who doesn't put all their eggs in one basket. And you might get into this industry and you might find that it's not for you. You might find that freelancing isn't for you and it's difficult, or it's just not what you want to do. And I just really, I hedged my bet. I wanted something to fall back on, and that was my degree. So I've still got that. And if I decide to leave this, industry, at least I know that I've got something that I can rely on, because people do leave this industry. It's not permanent. Things happen. And yeah, I think it's important to just shore yourself up a little bit. Yeah.
I think it's one of those things that, you're not a surgeon, neither am I. So you don't need to go through, that technical training.
Yeah.
Of course, operating a camera, for example, you
Yeah.
do need that technical training, but you can learn on the job is what you're saying, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think you would probably learn more on the job than, I'm not, disparaging any of the courses that happen, but
Sure.
I think field learning in our industry, there is so much that, because I didn't even do a media degree, that was the thing. So I went in and I didn't know any of this equipment, didn't know any of what, what works in a gallery, what the roles were. So for me, it was a little bit like, okay, I have to learn all of this on the job, and you just pick up little conversations here and there. And that's a sad thing in a way, because there's no also like any formal training. So when new people now join, I make it a point to be like, you probably don't know what that is, because I didn't when I joined. And for me, it's now about paying it forward. But I can't believe it's taken our industry so long to sort of get that attitude. There's a lot of people who think, oh, I went through that, no one taught me, you're on your own. And I just kind of think, well, we've got to break that cycle, and we've got to help other people, because, the young people are the ones who are going to take over from us. And I want to make sure that I give them all of the things that I know, and hopefully get them there quicker than me having to like second guess or
Right.
all of that. So it's also about creating an environment where if somebody hasn't had that training, that you give them the freedom to ask questions. And, any job that you go to, I just find it baffling, like any industry, any, creative side of things, to tell me one person who's walked into that job and known everything. No one has. So why would you want to put that? Like, again, I just think the empathy side of things, I would want somebody to feel a little bit less like I did when I first joined.
I think it's the society pressures, right, or the industry pressure that, you have to do X, the expectation that, oh, you must go to uni and then you need to do this and that. And so when you don't do that, it feels wrong, but it shouldn't feel wrong, because, you can learn the job.
Yeah.
You can, leap forward.
Yeah.
You don't have to go through a specific path, right? You can create your own path in a way.
No, that's it. And I think one of the things that I've rebelled against all my life is this idea of being prescriptive. If anyone tells me there is only one way to do something, I will will just be blown away to be like, hang on, you don't know that. And yes, that might have been the way that you've done it. And don't get me wrong, obviously someone talks about surgery and whatever, yeah, fine. But in the creative field, if you say, no, there's only one way to do this, this is how it's done, you've got to do this, this, and this, I'll be like, no. Because my background and my route into TV would be completely different. Probably even from, if you picked out, and I know other Muslims from Bradford who have gotten in TV, their experience has been totally different to mine. Right. So even if you're from the same demographic, you don't have the same route. And I think what I really enjoy is breaking out of this sort of prescriptive and, again, this sort of imagined or prescribed what I like is breaking out of this, pressure and this thing of like this rigid structure. In any sort of society, in any sort of field, racism, transphobia, all of these things, gay rights as well. They're all about breaking out of what people have said is acceptable and isn't.
Right.
And I apply that to work. I apply it to everything. I apply it to, one of the things I say to people is just question everything and get to your own conclusions with it. And if something doesn't feel right, then, follow that instinct. But certainly in this regard, what I really like, and it does bother people in TV a little bit because they're like, oh, young people aren't watching TV anymore and they're not doing this. And, how do we compete with like Netflix and stuff? And I'm like, you need to chill. There is room for everyone.
Right.
There's a lot. We have to look at ourselves and move with what is going on because the world ain't going to stop. And again, if you stay too rigid, you're going to get left behind. So I think as an industry, we've got a really interesting challenge as well. But I really like the fact that young people can now, become YouTubers, TikTokers, all of these things that were just never there when I was growing up. But rather than being like, looking down on it, I think we should embrace it. And let everyone find their own path because I think true storytelling and content will find a way and it'll find an audience.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of correct me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of freelancers in the industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
TV industry,
and
it comes
70% freelance.
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't know that. There's a lot of pressure, a mental health pressure that comes with it, right? Because you're jumping from one to another, and you have to find the next thing and the next thing, right? Tell me about your experience about facing mental health issues. And I know you created TV Mindset to support, not only kind of the immediate colleagues, but the industry with mental health issues. Would love to know a bit more about your experience, but also the TV Mindset organization that you set up.
Sure. So mental health has been a huge thing in my life. When I was at uni, I was diagnosed with depression, and that was all linked to me trying to come out to my family and all that stuff. And then later on in my 20s as well, I was sort of re-diagnosed, or there was something not quite right. And this was, outside of work stuff. And then just there's probably a trigger warning to be attached to this, but I ended up being misdiagnosed basically for 10 years. And I was told that I had something called borderline personality disorder, which is apparently what Amy Winehouse and a few other people have had. And it's now becoming a little bit more commonly discussed. But at the time, this was when I was 30, so 2015, 2016, I just didn't know what to do with that. And I did go off the rails. And I'm very open about my struggles. I became a drug addict. I was in an abusive relationship. I just wasn't in a position where I was wanting to be on this planet. And I think I was probably one bad decision away from not being here today. And I, was so lucky to get the help that I needed, the therapy. I left my job, went back to Bradford, had a really supportive family, didn't ask questions, and I just needed the space to sort of get back on track. And then when I did, I realised that a lot of what I was going through wasn't necessarily because of being freelance, but it certainly didn't help someone like me, because BPD is a condition of extremes as well, and highs and lows. And that is what freelance life is like. It's feast or famine, as we say in the industry as well.
Right.
You are either, constantly busy, and when you're at work, you're working all these long hours, sometimes weekends. You're putting everything into it because you want to be hyper perfect at your job. Because if you do a good job, someone on that production will probably have you back, and you've just got to be on. You stop taking sick days. You don't ask for your weekly therapy sessions. You for parents, childcare. You say, you think. And some people, don't get me wrong, and that's why we're in this position. I think not just in our industry. Some people will look at you and be like, oh, they leave at 5 p.m. every day to pick up their kid. Are they committed to the job? Oh, they need flexible working. And it's like, that's one of the great things of this pandemic, is that it's really leveled everything out. It's like, yes, you can. I made 100 hours of TV from home in the first year of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was like, don't tell me we can't do this. Or if somebody needs like access or an interpreter at work, Why can't we? That doesn't make them any less good at their job, but we should be able to accommodate that kind of thing. So TV Mindset was formed a couple of years after my recovery. I was, basically balancing myself out, and I just thought to myself, whatever I went through, because mental health wasn't spoken about, even though it doesn't seem that long ago, but 2015, 2016, people weren't talking about mental health.
Really?
It just wasn't a thing, certainly not in my industry. But all of the campaigns, that you see recently, it just wasn't as prominent in the public forum. And as a freelancer, you couldn't talk about it anyway. It was hard enough. Look, the national crisis of mental health and talking, that's why there's been so many campaigns in recent years. That was already existent. And then you look at that in the TV and freelance world, and you realise that actually no one is willing to put themselves out there, because if an employer saw something of mine on social media, would they think he's a liability, he can't do his job, he's got issues, I'm not sure, and then you don't, and you end up just sort of keeping it within you. So with that, I think one of the biggest things, when you lose everything, when you hit rock bottom, you stop giving a fuck, basically. Right. And I think that has been the biggest sort of unlocking of my life, where I just stopped caring about what people at home thought of my sexuality, what people in the gay world thought of my looks, what people in TV thought about my mental health. I was like, do you know what? I've been through this thing, and I'm so sick of this cycle, and what happened to me could happen to anyone else, and I got so lucky that I survived, because not everyone does. And I'll be really honest, a lot of what I do is obviously very personal, but it hits you in different ways. And this Easter just gone, my best friend of 16 years who didn't work in TV, she took her own life.
I'm sorry.
It happens. And, no matter how much we talk about mental health, and she was so proud of my work, but it will affect everyone. It will affect people in different ways. And my thing was, God, how can I, and I'm not obviously not there yet. It's not that, her issues were complicated, and it doesn't all come down to one thing, but you just think, God, I just want that person, or any person out there, whether it's someone I know or don't, or anyone who's listening to this, which is why I'm so open, because it might just reach that one person who needs to hear it. And it has, and I've had some lovely feedback over the years, but you just think, God, just please don't go through what I did to get to the realization.
The pandemic was worse in itself, but it feels like, having spoken to so many guests on the show, but also young people, that it almost kind of resulted into a mental health pandemic, and it's increasing. It's not decreasing. We had one of our first guests, a father who lost his son in the middle of the pandemic because of loneliness. They were living by themselves, 20-something, 24, 23, I can't remember the exact age. And they talked about they needed help, and there isn't any help. There is a generic phone line where you call, and they tried but tested it, and you were waiting on the phone for 10 minutes. So imagine if you're on the edge about to jump. You're not going to wait 10 minutes.
No.
So I'm hoping they have a campaign running to get a dedicated phone line for young adults, specifically for mental health and suicide prevention. So I'm hoping that goes through. But it is a big issue in the industry.
It's a huge issue, and I think what you find, going back to the question about being freelance, is that you do feel quite alone. There's when the phone isn't ringing, you just think, oh my God, there's something wrong with me, or all these people on social media seem to be getting jobs and I'm not getting them. I wonder why. You're constantly knocking on doors, which is so degrading. If you've been in this industry over 10 years and you think, oh my God, I'm still having to put my CV out, surely it should get easier, and it doesn't. The whole thing about, again, being hyper perfect and not just being able to express your emotions.
Right.
The film and TV charity, they do some great work. That's their name, the film and TV charity, and they did a survey around 2019, just before the pandemic, which I helped them a lot with, and their survey was so eye-opening for this industry, and again, just before the pandemic, so it all dovetailed in my work and their work, and there's a reason it resonated with so many people. But they found out that in the TV industry, 86% of people had suffered from poor mental health.
Wow.
86%, 50% had suicidal thoughts, and 1 in 10 had acted on it. And I was obviously one of those.
Wow.
But those stats are shocking for our industry. They've improved over. The film and TV charity constantly update their surveys, and they have improved. But the fact that we were in that position to begin with was so harrowing and so upsetting, and you just think it made me angry as well. And again, it's just one of those things where look, I don't believe. I mean, it's a mixture of things. There's being the right voice at the right time, but change is like it's from everyone. I know I've done a lot for this industry, and I've been a very loud voice because that's just who I am. And I just genuinely thought I had nothing left to lose. I was like, look, I've lost my job already. I've lost everything. But if me doing the right thing is, the thing that might just make a difference, I might leave this planet.
Exactly.
Having used my experiences to help other people, then that makes all of it worth it. I'm never going to get those years back. I wish I could. But actually, I do say to people, my life started at the age of 30 because that's when I found all of this out. I got the help that I needed. But I think that the way that I always put it when it comes to speaking up and talking about it is my desire to do the right thing began to outweigh my fear of being punished for it. Because people are scared of being punished for speaking out.
Oh, which is where they don't speak out, right? Because it's like, oh, my career is going to get ruined. And I mean, we see cancel culture very, very much in this day and age. Many for the right reasons, but some for the wrong reasons. And people just fear they're going to get cancelled and their life is going to get ruined. And it's, especially if you have kids or family to support, they just don't speak out. They just suck it up, basically.
It's a weird one with because I think I've benefited from cancel culture because
which is the good side of things,
made a difference because what we did and the empowerment that I had over the pandemic and the webinars we were doing, and every time someone would report something to me and I'd be like, okay, I've got to be careful legally here, but I can do something about this. And honestly, it was people power in action because people saw what was going on and we were talking about it, and we sometimes didn't even mention the company or the person, but these huge shows where bullying and harassment was going on, or this huge show where there's some racist incident, and we were able to give a community voice without actually naming people, because obviously that would have gotten in trouble. And then before you know it, I was getting calls from the broadcasters and whatever, and those people were removed. And then there were articles about it, oh, so-and-so has been let go, or like this bullying case has come up against this person. And I think what that has led companies to now, where we're at now is that they are scared of being cancelled.
Right.
And I think cancel culture is a really interesting one because it is about power structures. I know people say, oh, cancel this is that. No, it's about holding people with power to account.
Absolutely.
And that is what we did. And, I had I can't talk about it too much because I did on the stage once, and they had to cut it out because they were like, defamation. But I was like, look, it's a thing that happened. Like, you can look it up. It's not defamation. But I had a huge run-in. If you Google my name, one of the first things that comes up is a huge run-in with a very famous TV presenter. And there was a huge row in public that ended up developing into like a bullying and harassment thing. And again, I sort of ended up coming on top of that, and I wouldn't say winning because I don't like looking at it that way, but in terms of
it's a step towards the right thing, right?
Yeah, and that person didn't come off very well. They're very well known. They left their broadcaster a couple of weeks after, and again, it was that thing of like, you've got the right thing, you've got the right intention, and if somebody comes for that, I was so lucky I had a groundswell of like freelancers. But again, it's that thing of like, it's holding people accountable. And now companies are scared of mistreating their freelancers because they know that we won't be quiet anymore. And we deserve to go to work with dignity and respect. And I think everyone does. And they can't hide behind anything anymore. Before, it was all swept on the carpet. They're like, oh, that freelancer's not going to talk about that thing. And that is especially, it's more keenly felt when you're a minority. You don't want to be that difficult person of colour because you're like, oh, here he comes, talking about race issues again. Why is everything about race? or you're that person who is disabled, and oh great, and I've got friends who run campaign groups about disability in the industry, and again you do worry that your career is going to suffer. There's already a glass ceiling for people from minorities anyway, but you then worry even more, like, I'm already disadvantaged in this industry. If I start speaking out for things that affect me, then that could hit me even harder. But then you sort of take a step back and think, well, if I don't do it, who's gonna? Because I'm not going to expect some white privileged people to speak about my issues, because A, they don't know, B, they don't care. So I just have to do it myself.
Right. So speaking of racism, I see you've got 37 jobs on LinkedIn. I can see all glam from outside that you're working with all these amazing people, celebrities and shows. But I'm sure there's, from the inside is different.
Yeah.
And when I say different, I mean discrimination.
Yeah.
Right. And I know we spoke before, and you mentioned just now as well that, there's racism in the industry. Tell us a bit more about that. And did you experience that yourself? Did you see others, of course? And what do you do about that?
I mean, again, short answer, yes, it is rife. Find me an industry that racism isn't present in. The way that I always look at it is, obviously, there's the overt racism, which is, obviously being called a certain name, or, having that sort of very open discrimination, which of course is illegal, but it happens. And there's the covert racism, where a lot of people hold their hands up, particularly in this industry, and like, I can't be racist. What, just because you've never said the N word or the P word, you think you're not racist? No, we're talking about structures here, and everything that I do is all about structures and stepping back and looking at the big picture. And the truth is, every industry in this country, apart from maybe some of the more modern ones, but I would say all of the major industries in this country were formed at a time when the dominant social group was, white middle-class males. So ultimately, all of the structures and the things and the foundations that we live around are generally there to benefit those people. So if you are, a woman in the industry, we know what women have been through, even when it comes to as recently as Me Too, which was obviously from the TV and film industry. You look at people from, we look at the BLM movement and how everyone's stories came out from that. So every minority, I'm pretty sure, and every person of colour has a story in TV, and I'm sure they do outside as well, but we all have a story. And we've all probably had a moment where we've decided to let it go, because it's not worth it. You look around, and when your industry is, and has been for the most part, predominantly white, if I look around, I'm like, well, who's going to believe me? Who's going to have my back? That person's not going to do it. They've got nothing at stake here. They're not going to speak up because I've just experienced something racist. And that was the really interesting thing post BLM, is like, yeah, but you're also complicit if you see this and you don't say anything. That we need allies, and you can't just be a fair weather friend. You've got to do the work. So it is really difficult, and I'd like to say it's getting less. I certainly get fewer reports of racism. Ableism, I still think, is a big issue that we need to deal with. Transphobia, I'm keeping an eye on, because it's again another thing that worries me. But it's all forms of discrimination, bullying and harassment, and everything. And I think, to answer the other part of your question, is that what do you do? It is kind of similar in all of those fronts. It's really hard, and it is very dependent on the situation and the person. I can't, in good conscience, again, say a junior member of the team who's experienced racism, if they're reporting to a white HR person about, ultimately HR and a lot of those places are there to protect the company, not the individual.
Sure.
And certainly not a freelancer who's sort of come in, for a couple of months and then left again. So again, our rights are it's hard for us. And we found that out during the pandemic, when the government wasn't even willing to support freelancers and help them out financially. So we sort of live with that anyway. And you kind of just, I suppose it's no different to when you're on a bus and you see someone being harassed and you think, can I be bothered getting involved in that or not? And also the victim in that situation, they could fight back, or they could just ignore it and go away. And we've all been there, in some form or other. And I think that's the negotiation you make at work, except you've probably got some bigger considerations, because you think well, this is my job, this is my livelihood, I can't lose this.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I have to just get my head down, and again, no one's going to believe me or whatever. So we've had to, you know, until BLM, we had to push a lot of that down. And I think I'd like to say the tide is turning. I do think there's some forms of covert racism that still exist in terms of the glass ceiling of the industry. And I know full well from myself and my own career, from other people, from black women, from, you know, people who from disadvantaged backgrounds, that we tend to hover in the mid-range of the industry, and very few tend to break through, because that's where real power, the shift is going to happen. When more of us are in those rooms where decisions are being made, that is when it's going to happen. And then there's a mixture, you know, the people who do end up there, and you know, look, there's nothing to say that every culture has to be a monolith, but I have found that there are people who go through those things and then pull the ladder up behind them. So it's very easy for companies to say, we've got a, you know, person of colour in this position or whatever, but they're like, well, they're kind of upholding everything. Again, they're not shaking anything up because they've gotten through, they've got this cushy job, but they're not willing to help or look at the landscape further on. So there is that side of it, but certainly I've found in my career, and it's changing now, but again, I wonder, would I have got this if I hadn't had the profile with the campaigning? But I'm also really good at my job. I'd like to think that. But you always do question it. Again, the fact that I've even just said that, I'm now breaking through, but as a minority, I'm questioning, is that really because of my merit, or is it because I've done campaigning and I've got a really loud voice?
Right, yeah.
So we have that inner thing where we're just like, and I walk in and you have that look or whatever, and like, do people think that I'm just here because of my skin color? And then as a result, you end up working twice as hard and burning yourself out even more because you feel like you've got a point to prove.
I do feel like that equal opportunity is still a long way.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not there yet. I think we're just, as you said, just starting to break through.
Yeah.
But there's a long, long way through. I mean, personally, I came to the country, UK, 17, 18 years ago. And pretty much for the first decade, I felt like, oh, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't say this, or I don't deserve this because, you know, I'm new to this country. What do I know? So I always sort of, you know, reserved myself from saying the right things, or, you know, going for the bigger jobs, or asking for a little bit more salary, because I feel like maybe I shouldn't. Maybe, you know, I don't deserve this because, you know, they're right, I'm wrong. But actually, it's not about that. It's about the merit. And it should be about merit, that if you are performing and if you are good at what you do, then you should be given equal opportunity.
You should. It just doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that. It's a long way to go.
And if you do end up being quite confident, the way that I do get called, you know, arrogant and egotistical, and I'm like, what? Because I know my worth, because I'm not willing to negotiate for less than I think, and I've got a CV to back it up. You know, you want to hire me, you've got to show me. And I'd say this when you go into a job interview, it's like going on a date. Do I want to wake up next to this person every day? Is this person going to make me feel good about myself? And if the answer's no, then it's not for me. I'd rather say no to the job. But don't, you know, again, that thing is like, oh God, he's really big for his boots, or he's arrogant or whatever. It's like, no, but where's that line again of like, I've worked hard for 14 years. I deserve. I'm not gonna be, you know, a prick about it and be like, oh my God, I'm too good for this or whatever. No, of course not. You work in a collaborative environment. But I think what you said earlier about equality is really interesting, because it is a word that comes around a lot, and the EDI you know, sector now is, so it's a huge buzzword. But for me, it's the word equity.
Equity.
And I've always said, you know, before we even get to what, you have to realise that, you know, people like you and I, for example, compared to, let's say, you know, somebody with a disability, or, you know, a trans person or a black woman, there's different levels of equity, and each one needs a different approach. So you can't, you know, people talk about things like, you know, unconscious hiring and like all of that stuff, but it's like, we can't really get there because we don't all have equity yet. And when I formed, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is the Coalition for Change, and, you know, looking at all these groups in TV that were campaigning, there is that phrase, isn't there? There's, and I do say this with my campaigning, is that, you know, you want to fight for a seat at the table. And my thing is that this table is busted. I don't want to sit at it. I want to make a brand new table and give everyone equity at it. And I'm really proud that we've done that. But I don't want I don't want a seat at that table because I believe that it's built on a really false foundation. So you can have that if you want, but this is what I want. This is what I want to put down. And if I've got the power to get people round a table, then I'm going to make it a different one. I don't want your one.
Speaking of coalition for change, it's sort of like the next step after TV Mindset.
Yes.
And it's an industry roundtable
Yeah.
of, you know, broadcasters, various people in the industry coming together to make a difference. Has it made a difference so far? I know it's fairly new-ish, but what are the key initiatives that you're working on at the moment, and what would be the sort of like the holy grail that you would like to achieve as a group?
Sure. So with the Coalition for Change, it was the culmination of all the campaigning I was doing during the pandemic, and it's all well and good talking about these things, but my worry was, well, what if we don't get any action, and if we all end up going back to work and nothing changes? I was like, I cannot have that. So with the help of the Edinburgh TV Festival, we started doing a couple of more public roundtables with broadcasters. And initially what I wanted them to sign up to was a freelance charter, like you will do this, this and this. Freelancers will have these rights, blah, blah, blah. Legally, we couldn't do that. It was a very hard thing to get all of these broadcasters who'd never historically worked with each other. You know, I was making phone calls and saying, look, you know, this is something, and they were like, well, what's in it for you? This is weird. This is suspicious. What's going on? And I'm like, oh my God, trying to do the right thing.
To do the right thing.
It's just, and it was so hard. And again, mentally, I burnt out. I've gone through a lot actually through this campaigning. It's something I've not really talked about today, but you know, the toll that it's taken on me, I've had to really reestablish my boundaries on a lot of fronts, including with fellow freelancers, because you get into this position and you're just like, but I also need to have a job and a life, and I need to work out, you know, I didn't get into this. So and that'll lead to the Holy Grail question later. But with the coalition, then it was like, right, we need to get everyone in this industry together because it's very fractured. You know, Sky doesn't know what BBC is doing, or they've all got their own initiatives. The union, Beck2, are doing something different to the film and TV charity. And it's like, we just need to get together. Because we all employ freelancers and we're all interested in that. And those are the most vulnerable group. And they make up the largest part of the workforce. So why are we not talking? Like, I got really bored of like, oh, well, that person said this and this. I was like, you just need to get into a room and thrash it out.
Yeah.
So we were really lucky. Everyone, after a lot of door knocking and all of that stuff, everyone signed up to it. I think we've got now 40 organisations.
Amazing.
So BBC, ITV, Channel 4, Viacom, CBS, Channel 5, Netflix, Amazon, BAFTA, BFI, Ofcom, film and TV charity, loads of unions, Equity, Directors UK. It's huge. And I'm so proud of it that this little kid from Bradford, this little awkward gay kid from Bradford, has somehow made enough of a noise that my experiences actually meant something, that I could raise this. And we had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they was like, oh, is there anything else you want to add, Adeel? I was like, yeah, I just want us all to know that I'm really proud of this 2 years down the line. We are such a unique group that other industries are now wanting to follow this model. And I'm so proud that we are here to make positive change. Initially, it was really difficult. The first year that we did quarterly meetings, and we had a big topic for each one, like bullying and harassment, training or lack of training. I think the next one was like recruitment and how that happens in the industry. And again, there was a lot of, you know, fractious discussion and people not agreeing with each other. But my job was to just chair it and cut through and find those commonalities and bring, again, it's all about coalition. And just finding those nuggets and the through lines that would make people happy. Yeah. And then what we ended up doing, and certainly our biggest success so far that we need to build on, is we launched something called the Freelance Charter, which people can view if you go to coalitionforchange.org.uk, our website. You can see the Freelance Charter, and it is quite a hefty document that sets out all of those sections and what each member of the coalition who signed up to it pledges to do. So it's commissioning behaviour, how you expect your producers to behave, how your commissioners behave, how we expect to treat freelancers, trading opportunities, what to do with bullying and harassment, and then there's a guide of like a whole directory of like where to go if this happens and whatever. Because we didn't want to, you know, there are talks about an independent reporting body and things like that in TV, which would be great, but we couldn't do that at this point, and I'm only one person. But what we could do is strengthen our existing structures. And it's a real statement of intent from everyone in that group. and as an industry, we're united and we're like, this is the industry we want to create.
That's amazing.
This is what we support.
Yeah.
And the holy grail for it all would be for me to shut it down.
Yeah.
I don't.
Because it normalizes the need.
100%. I don't want to have to do this work,
Yeah,
and it
exactly.
shouldn't have fallen on to a minority with a lot at stake to do this. I did it. I've got a responsibility, but honestly, my greatest dream is that I don't have to do it anymore because it means we're in a good enough
It's amazing, yeah. You know, change comes from struggle and resilience, and this is a really good example of that. I really, really love that. So thank you for sharing.
No one tells you how bloody hard it is, though, let me tell
No,
you. It's like
no, it
the
doesn't.
cost. I wish I'd known a lot back then than I, you know,
Yeah,
I really do because it is, I can't, lots of lovely things have happened, but of course behind the scenes it's also very, very
of course.
difficult.
Yeah. We talked about, freelance jobs, jumping from one to another. We talked about racism. We talked about mental health issues. We talked about the industry needing a change. But if you're a young person trying to get into this industry, are there any positives? What are the positives?
Look, I wouldn't be here, and a lot of us who are campaigning wouldn't be here if we didn't love what we did and we didn't believe in this industry. And there are people who don't, and you get to your mid-30s and you have one more racist incident and you're just like, you know what, I can't do this anymore, I'm out, I just can't put myself through this. And that still happens, and minorities are usually the first to leave. But we love this industry, and I'm so lucky that I get to do this job for a living. Through the pandemic, we did entertain millions of people. We are telling stories. We are improving we're adding to the economy. Everything that people talk about, it is about the new Netflix series. It is about something that was on TV last night, and no one really thinks about the people who make it. But we know that we do. Light entertainment might be, just as valid as a BAFTA-winning documentary. That's how I see it. I don't really care. Like, we're just giving people content. We're telling stories, and more importantly, as time goes on, we are telling stories from voices that have not historically been listened to.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's why it's so important that we constantly have people coming into this industry, but also people with different viewpoints.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're just doing the same stuff over and over again. So there is a lot of positivity. There's so much. Every part of my team that I put together, whether it's, the runner or the sound tech or in studio, the camera op, everyone makes those shows.
Yeah.
And it's just such a wonderful example of collaboration and what we can all do and how we will work together to produce something really fun and wonderful for a lot of people. I just think we should be able to do it with a bit of dignity and respect.
100%. Yeah. What's your favorite Netflix or any content that you really love?
At the moment, it's the White Lotus series 2,
Right.
Which is I find it really difficult to watch like factual or entertainment stuff or quiz shows because I work on them. So for me, it's like going to work. Yeah. So I end up defaulting a lot to drama and comedy, scripted stuff, because I don't work in those industries. I don't really know how it's made. So that's my escapism. And I love stuff like The Good Fight, the White Lotus, some good comedies, on Netflix as well. Just anything like Kim's Convenience was my binge watch during the pandemic. So anything, on that kind of front is always Succession. Obviously, everyone is talking. So stuff like that, I absolutely love, and it's just one of the joys of being part of BAFTA as well. Is that you get the insight and you get to champion a lot of this work.
Amazing. I could talk to you all day. You have such a amazing energy, honestly.
Oh, thank you.
But we have to end it somewhere. So one of the last questions I asked the guest is, if you were young again, what would be your message to yourself? What would be the advice to give yourself? So, dear Adeel.
This is really hard. It's also really hard to talk about without getting a bit emotional. So before I do say it, I think obviously we've talked about it a little bit, but that younger self, I really feel for that kid because it was tough. Growing up in an environment where everything you feel and believe is wrong, or you're being made to feel at every corner. And this is what I always say, like with in fact, I will start so the thing I would say to my younger self is be the most authentically, unapologetically you, and be that person quicker. Because at every corner of life, whether it's because you're a brown-skinned man, whether it's because you're gay, whether it's because you're Muslim in this country, whether it's the fact that you're a northerner in TV with no background, or whether it's because you've got mental health issues, whether it's because you're a campaigner. But I've never done anything by the book, and I've not even planned to. I've just been this person. And for some reason, at every corner, every juncture, the world has made me feel like I don't deserve to be here. And again, when I went to rock bottom and I did everything that everyone expected of me and I still ended up there, I was like, this isn't fair. So what I would want to give that younger version of me is that sense of people are going to hate you no matter what. And yes, you do need to go on this journey, but don't shrink yourself. Don't constantly try and fit into a box, because what you have done, breaking out of the box, has been the best thing that you have done. And the nicest thing about it is I've not had to be anyone other than me. And it's taken me a really long time to fall in love with myself, physically, emotionally, balancing the mental health. And I look in the mirror and I bounce out of bed because I'm so lucky to be here. And I want everyone to fall in love with themselves in that way, have that confidence, realise they deserve to be here. I couldn't do it for my best friend, but I know that there'll be someone out there that does resonate with. And just know that being authentically you can never apologise for that. You can never feel guilty for that. It might not be to everyone's taste. And again, you might fall into all of these categories. But for my younger self, I'd be like, be who you are. Don't let anyone tell you who you are and who you're not. And carry on that course.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing all the amazing insights. Thank you for sharing your personal story. And thank you for making a difference in the industry.
Thank
Good
you
luck.
very much.
I'm going to shake your hand.